And welcome back to another episode of Sister Gets Real, where we unpack the headlines, decode the drama, and most importantly, keep it 100. Today, we're diving literally and figuratively into one of the wildest stories in the last few years, and that is the OceanGate disaster. Now, I know you've been seeing clips of this event circle all over social media and also on the two documentaries on Disney Plus and Netflix. And that's got a lot of people reflecting on what had happened. Now, before we step into this episode, I'm giving the trigger warning to all the listeners out there. This episode discusses themes of death, suicide, and tragic implosion of the OceanGate Titan submersible. Listener discretion is advised, especially for those who may be sensitive to content related to catastrophic loss, mental health, or underwater trauma. Feel free to skip or pause if the subject matter becomes too heavy. Just remember, your peace of mind comes first. Now, when this happened 2 years ago, I was just like anyone else watching the news. I was fascinated by what had happened. However, whenever we started learning more details about the OceanGate submersible, there was a lot of things that, I wanted to discuss and learn more about this submersible, like who was this company and what they was about and how did they let this happen. However, whenever I went deeper into learning more about this company, there were some nuances, warnings, and also ego-driven lessons that a lot of people are not talking about. But before we unpack all of that, let's rewind. Let's look at who OceanGate was, how this tragedy was allowed to happen, and most importantly, how unchecked ego can literally lead people to their deaths. But what was OceanGate? OceanGate was founded back in 2009 in Seattle by Richard Stockton Rush III and Guillermo Zerline. On the surface, it was a privately owned marine exploration company that offered deep sea trips for a number of reasons. For example, tourism, research, and exploration. Sounds kind of cool, right? But this is where things get a little spicy. Stockton Rush was not just the co-founder, he was the face, he was the pilot and the driving force behind it all. And let me tell you, the man had his credentials. He comes from serious money. He's the youngest of 5 children in a wealthy family. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering from Princeton University, earned in 1984, and also a Master of Business Administration from the University of California, Berkeley Hahn School of Business, completed in 1989. So on paper, he looked legit. Even his bloodline had prestige. He was descended from 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence, Richard Stockton and Benjamin Rush. So this wasn't some nobody. He was respected, connected, and definitely had people around him willing to bet on his vision. But there's always a but. From the very beginning, people noticed something else about him. His pride, his arrogance, and his clear refusal to follow the rules. Now that we learn what OceanGate was and who Stockton Rush was, let's get into the red flags and ignore warnings. All right, y'all, now let's get into the real danger. And it starts with a material that sounds fancy and futuristic, but in a sense it's not. Carbon fiber. So what is even carbon fiber? Well, in the simplest terms, it's a super lightweight, super strong metal made from strands of carbon woven together and set in a resin. Think about it as high-tech fabric hardened to shape. It's great for building things that need to be light and fast, like race cars, airplanes, high-end bicycles, and even some spacecraft parts. Now here's the catch. Carbon fiber is great at handling pressure from the inside out. It's built to resist pushing outward like fuel pressure in a jet engine. But the deep ocean, I don't think so. Down there, the pressure is pushing inward and crushing inward from all sides. Unlike metal, carbon fiber doesn't handle this kind of compression well. Over time, it starts to develop tiny cracks between the woven layers, a process called delamination. And here's the chilling part. Once those layers start to separate, you can't see that with the naked eye. There's no obvious break, but internally, the structure is compromised. This is exactly what marine engineers and experts warn OceanGate about. They say, hey, carbon fiber might be cool for planes or sports cars, but It ain't built for 13,000 feet under the ocean. That's a place where metal balls and titanium are the standard. Stuff that's been pressure tested over the decades. And even that is risky. But Stockton Rush didn't want to hear that. He didn't want heavy tested materials. He wanted light, fast, and innovative, whatever that means. He called Titan's carbon fiber design a breakthrough. Expert call it a gamble and a dangerous one. Now remember I mentioned the Netflix documentary? Trust me, they bought receipts. People who've been inside the sub before the final dive describe hearing popping sounds during each descent. At first, they thought it was just a usual stress test of diving, but later, experts explained that those pops were likely the carbon fiber slowly failing, tiny fractures, structural weaknesses, and early signs of collapse. But trust me, that wasn't the only red flag. They also was plagued with battery failures, communication breakdowns, and even one time a dive, they were stuck underwater for hours. So the signs were there, and yet Stockton Rush kept pushing forward. He even decided to sell the tickets for $250,000 a seat to billionaires and explorers like it was a luxury yacht cruise, not a high risk experimental mission into the pitch black ocean floor. So let's call it what it is. This wasn't some unfortunate accident. This was ego dressed as innovation, recklessness sold as adventure, and weakness marketed as immunity from consequences. Even though Stockton went ahead with the project, there were people in OceanGate that tried to sound the alarm and tried to warn people. And the first person was David Lockridge. He was an OceanGate director of marine operations and basically one of the few people inside the company that was brave enough to say, hey, this isn't safe. David wrote a safety report in 2018, yes, 5 years before the disaster, that detailed major concerns about the Titan submersible. He said that the carbon fiber hull was not properly tested and warned that it could fail under pressure of the deep ocean. Now, instead of taking those concerns seriously and making the product better, what did OceanGate do? They fired him and then sued him for speaking out. Make that make sense. However, Lockridge wasn't alone either. Multiple experts from the Marine Technology Society, a group of oceanic engineers and submersible experts, sent a letter to Stockton Rush in 2018 warning him that the Titan design was risky and lacked proper testing. They literally said that this could lead to catastrophic consequences. Their message: don't dive until this thing is proven safe. But Stockton Rush was definitely not trying to hear that. He felt regulations slowed him down. He even once said on record that safety was pure waste, like word for word. And the quote is, at some point, safety is just pure waste. I mean, if you want to be safe, just don't get out of bed. Sir, you cannot be serious. And here's another kicker. The sub wasn't even certified. The Titan was not classed or certified by any major marine safety organization. Now, you wonder why. Because Stockton Rush didn't believe in outside oversight. He believed that he was building something new, bold, and disruptive. But listen, no matter how rich or how smart you are, you cannot disrupt physics. You cannot disrupt the crushing pressure of 13,000 feet underwater. It doesn't care about your net worth. It doesn't care about your ambition or your ancestors. So this was not just recklessness, it was deliberate negligence. And people who raised the alarms were treated like haters and obstacles. In reality, they were trying to save lives. So let's talk about what happened on that final fatal dive. It was June 18, 2023. OceanGate Titan submersible set off to visit the Titanic wreck site located 12,500 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic. On board were 5 people, all whom paid the ultimate price for what should have been a dream adventure. Let's name them: Stockton Rush, Hamish Hardy, Shazda Darwood, and his 19-year-old son, Suleman Dawood, and Paul Halani Knowledge. 5 men gone in an instant. Experts now believe that the Titan imploded just an hour and 45 minutes into its descent, with such intense force that it would have been over before anyone even realized what was happening. Now, here's the thing that haunts me: this wasn't their first dive, this wasn't their first malfunction, this wasn't even the first time someone has almost died on board. Yet, Stockton Rush kept going. He ignored every warning, silenced whistleblowers, and cut every corner in the name of disruption. But at some point, we all have to ask, was this really about ego, or was this a man who didn't care if he lived or died and didn't care who he took with him? Now, here's a little controversial viewpoint that I have. I'm just going to say it. I don't think it was just pride going wrong. I believe that Stockton Rush wanted to die. And worse, I believe he was willing to bring others with him. Let's think about this for a minute. He had already been warned. He heard that the sub was making disturbing sounds during prior dives. He ignored all the legal threats, engineering reports, and even tested expert advice. And yet, he still handpicked 4 men to ride with him on a vessel that he knew that wasn't really pressurized or properly tested. That's not bravery. That's not even exploration. I believe it was just disregard of human life with a suicide mission. Now, you might get mad at me for this. I feel a little sympathy for Stockton Rush because he could have been dealing with some internal war, but what I feel more is anger. Anger for the people that really trusted him, especially Suleman Dawood, who was only 19 years old. From the reports that I heard, is that he didn't want to go. He only did it because his father wanted him to go, and plus it was Father's Day. That is the part that really breaks me. This isn't just about technology or billionaires or not even the Titanic. I believe it's when people with money and power stop believing that the rules apply to them. This is how charisma make people reckless, and how ego can be used as a weapon that's even deadlier than ocean waters. So please sip what I have said today. Money does not make you invincible. Credential doesn't replace wisdom. And just because someone is a visionary, that doesn't mean they won't lead you off of a cliff. We are living in times where people confuse risk taking with recklessness, where men like Stockton Rush are celebrated for pushing boundaries, even if they gonna ignore the cost and people get hurt. Pushing boundaries isn't brave when you're gambling with other people's lives. It's dangerous, it's selfish, and in this case, it turned out to be fatal. All right, everyone. This has been another episode of Sister Gets Real. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope it makes you think a little deeper when trying to be innovative. So if you want to hear more conversations like this, please go over to my Patreon, where I drop bonus materials, bonus episodes, pop culture breakdowns, and exclusive commentary for just my real ones. And listen, and thank y'all for riding with me, even though this subject was a little dark. I appreciate all the listeners. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember, just because someone has a submarine doesn't mean that they know what they're doing. Be real with yourselves, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.